Okay, start out again here that we've got James, and we've talked about all the introductory material, and how that finally he died by being taken up and thrown off of the temple. And so we get down to James, and the book is a book of common sense or practical Christianity. Things that have to do with how you live for Christ every day of your life. It's not a book that you outline and say, okay, this is about this, this is about this, but he goes from one subject to another. Now, when you try really hard, when I've forced the issue, I can say, well, in chapter 1, we're talking about trials. Now, I know that we start out talking about trials, count it all joy, and so we're talking about trials. And so the first part is, how should you look at trials? What are they for? Then the second thing that we've already studied about is then that the wisdom to deal with trials. How do you get that wisdom when you're in all of those trials and troubles and tribulations? How do you get the wisdom to go through that? And now then, tonight we're down at the next stage in this thing, and we're going to be talking about tonight chapter 1, verses 9 through 11 here to start with. And as we're talking about this, the trials and tribulations of mankind, it's going to be about money. By the way, anybody in this class deal with money? The common sense and how you do it and how you look at it. And so it's something that everybody does. Now, this is a trial or a problem in every generation of mankind. There never has been a generation that hasn't had to deal with problems, that hasn't had to deal with how you view problems, and there never will be another generation because every generation of people, every person, regardless of who they are, has to have something to do in the realm of finances. Now, you might be on welfare, and you might not work a day in your life, but somehow somebody is going to be giving you money. It may be your family, it may be the government, you may steal it. There's lots of ways to deal with it, but you cannot go through life without dealing with money. So how do we deal then with this money problem? Really, here is the idea now that we're going to be dealing with tonight. Now, as we look at this, we can say it's a great lesson for today, and that is October the 9th, 2008. You're facing the most dangerous financial crisis since the Great Depression, and all of us know that. We know what's happened to it in the stock market, and not only the stock market, but the banks, and not only the banks, but every place throughout the nation. Your automobile dealers, they heard today that they say that 30% of the people that come in and say, I want to buy an automobile, cannot qualify for a loan, even though they have good credit. They've always been able to buy a car, but they will not loan them money. Now, this is not only true here in America, but around the world. Now, it's not my purpose tonight to talk about the financial problem and how to correct it, because I don't have the slightest idea. And you say, well, what about the bailout? That's not the point. I don't have the slightest idea what we should do. But here's one thing that I do know, and that is that I do know that our leaders, our great wise men up in Washington, don't know either, do they? You hear them say this, you hear them say that, and then you do this, and then you do that. And so they say, if we don't do this, the stock market is going to just fall. So we've got to get this thing done in the next 2 or 3 days. Remember how that happened last week? So they got it done, and what happened? Stock market just crashed. Showed exactly opposite. Now, all I'm saying is, they don't know. I don't know. Don't know of anybody who knows. You say, what is the situation? It's around the world. Now, why am I talking about this? If I'm not trying to tell you how to handle your finances, because I'm pointing out that every generation faces tremendous financial problems. And there's never been a generation since the Depression that has faced as great a financial problem as you and I are facing today. How it will turn out, I have no idea. Whether next week, bing, everything will be okay, or whether it's going to go on, and we're going to really have some problems. But I do know that if you've got a 401k, a retirement plan of any kind, I do know that if you open it up and look at it, you're going to get shocked. All of a sudden, you see it's going way down. Now the question is, how are you dealing with it? That's the only question I have. It's not, what are you going to do about it? Are you going to sell out and keep cash? Are you going? That's not the question. I'm not even going to talk about it. I'm going to talk about how you're dealing with it. How you're dealing with it when all of a sudden you look and that amount which you intended to retire on has gone, boom, 40% down, as they said today. And so you look at it, I used to have enough to retire on, now I don't. What am I going to do? How am I going to deal with it? Now here's the problem. Remember, this book is about everyday practical Christianity, and that's what I'm talking about. Here's the situation. How do I deal with it in my mind? It's not a matter of how much money I've lost, whether it's everything or just a little bit, or that's not it. It's how do I view it? How do I look at it? Will I be able to sleep tonight when I go to bed? How do I feel? This is what James is going to be dealing with. This is what he's going to tell us. Now, these people scattered throughout all the world, they had all of these financial problems themselves. Now here, as we start out tonight, before we actually get in the book of James, I want to talk just a few minutes about some other scriptures that I think we need to look at. That back in Haggai, we can look back and we can see God's hand in history. And we can learn from various parts that God has His hand in the nations of kings. He said, I raise up whom I will, and I will destroy whom I will. He has His hand in that. Now here's an interesting thing. Back in this day, God's people were sent back to Jerusalem to go back and rebuild Jerusalem. They were supposed to go back, rebuild Jerusalem. Nehemiah led the people back, and Ezra. Nehemiah, he built the walls around there. And now then, they're getting ready to build the temple. Well, once they got back and got the walls built around the city, they looked out here, and of course all their houses were also torn down. Not only the temple, but remember when in captivity, all their houses were torn down? So they looked around and said, okay, let's get busy. Let's build our houses, and we will build the temple. So we start really at the same time, building the temple, building our houses. Guess which one took the preeminence? The houses all of a sudden started taking the preeminence. And so God, in order to show them and teach them a lesson, He tells them, there in verse 2, verse 4, is it time for you to dwell in your sealed houses while this house lieth waste? God says, is it time, do you think it's right for you to live in your finished houses that have been sealed, and everything is all finished, but my house lieth waste, and you haven't made the necessary sacrifices? He said, now consider your way. And here it is. You have sown much and bring in little. You eat, but you have not enough. You drink, but you're not filled with drink. You clothe you, but there's none warm. And he that earneth wages to put it in a bag with holes. That's the point I want us to see. Isn't that graphic? Every one of us, we didn't put it in bag with holes. That's talking about you put it in a bag, in a nice leather purse or whatever it is, and it's all secure and you can't do it. And so you're walking along and all of a sudden you reach in to get your money and wow, that bag has holes in it and you've lost all your money. God said, have you ever thought about it that way? Now, of course, we don't do that. We put ours in the stock market or the bank. I don't care where you put it, whether it's all up here in the bank or whether it's down at Schwab or whatever it is. And if you got it in Merrill Lynch, what happened? Woo! See, it's there. And so, but you look at it, and here it is. It's in a brokerage. I can't lose. There's no way I can lose. Until all of a sudden, this thing happened, and now then, bing, bing, bing. What happened to the brokerage accounts over here? It's got a hole in it. It's just somebody went in there and they just take a scoop shovel and shovel that money out, you see, that's in there. Now, God said back there, He said, I've caused this. I have caused you to get in this financial crisis to teach you a lesson. Now, I don't know. I can't tell you anything else, but I can tell you. God goes ahead and He said, I'm the one that did it. He said, you do this, but He said, I blow up on it, and the way it goes, and all of a sudden, here's all I know. I know in this great, wise world, with all the financiers, with all the wisdom around the world, Japanese, Chinese, every country in the whole world, nobody understood what was going to happen 2 weeks ago. We got up, and there it is. Now, how you taking it? This is all I'm saying. Not what you're going to do about it. Nobody knows what to do about it. How you take it? How do we look at it? In other words, as we start looking at money, I'm just trying to make a point today. It's a real practical situation. And this crisis just happened to come while we're in the class at this particular time. So that's the most dangerous trial money is, gaining and losing wealth, the most dangerous trial or problem every generation has. Now you say, why would you call it a problem if you're gaining wealth? We've had good years behind us. We've gained wealth, lots of riches, a lot of people become rich, a lot of wealth has been there. But now there's problems on both sides of this thing, see? This is the point. And this is where Jesus taught us a great lesson when that young man came to Him, very spiritually minded man. I suppose the finest man I've ever heard of. I've never heard of anybody that quite as good as this guy other than the Lord Himself. But he came up and he said, Lord, what must I do to inherit eternal life? And the Lord said, well, you know what you do. You do this and do this and do this. He said, I've done all that. Now he said, I've done it from my youth up. In other words, I've never sown any wild oats. I've never had any wild times. From the time I was a little kid, I've kept all these commandments. That's pretty perfect, isn't it? That's pretty good in there. He said, what do I lack yet? The Lord looked into his heart, and that's where we come back to this mind. And He saw something in that guy's mind. And He saw his attitude toward money. He saw he had a problem. Now, He told him, He said, you go sell what you have and give to the poor and come and follow me. Well, this now is a trial, and we're going to be talking about trials in here. Now, this is a trial, and this young man, it says, turned away and went away sorrowful. It just made him sick. He was so sad because he had much wealth. He wasn't able to lose his wealth. Then the Lord turned around and He looked at His disciples, and He said what you have there in red. He said, how hardly, that is how hard it is, shall they that have riches enter into the kingdom of heaven, God. That is so hard for riches. The first thing we can learn tonight, remember this is practical Christianity. That's what this class is about, practical Christianity. Everyday living. Now, which is the worst? Which is the most dangerous? When you gain wealth or when you lose wealth? See? Well, here it is, He says, I want you to know that when you're gaining, when you're rich, it is so hard to enter into the kingdom of God. Talking about up there. It's just so hard to go to heaven when you have wealth. So His disciples asked Him, evidently their climate was about like ours. Everybody was living a pretty good life. Well, Lord, who then can be saved? If a rich man can't be saved, who can be saved? Well, Jesus comes down. He answered them. He said, how hard is it for them that trust in riches? See, there's the key. That's the reason I come back up here. I don't care how much money you have. I don't care if you got billions of dollars or whether you lost everything you got. It's up here. This is how you live. Trust in riches. If you trust in riches, well, you're a rich man, you got problems. First of all, you're not going to go to heaven. And you're not going to be able to live for God the way you ought to be able to live. Trust in riches. He comes down and he says it's easier for a camel to go through a needle's eye than for a rich man to enter into the kingdom of God. Now, if that's not the most fascinating statement you ever heard in your whole life, I've never heard anything like it. How hard is it for a rich man to go to heaven? Well, he said it's easier for a camel to crawl through the eye of a needle, sewing needle, than for a rich man to go to heaven. Well, what chances are that? How many times have you ever seen a camel crawl through a needle's eye? But it's impossible. And that's what they said. Well, it's impossible. And Jesus agreed. And he said, yeah, with men it's impossible. So just taking a chunk, it's impossible for a rich man to go to heaven. Wow. What in the world are we going to do about that? Then he comes and he says, but with men, with God, all things are possible. So with God, everything is possible. Now, what's that telling us about a rich man? It's impossible because we got that trust in that money. But with God, we're going to have to depend on God's guidance, on God's teaching. Don't ever think you can go through this life, gain wealth, and use it properly without total dependence upon God. So I've often said this. In my study of the Scriptures, I see two things that seem to just stand out, separate and apart from all other things. Most dangerous things in the world, bar none. What do you suppose they are? Most dangerous things that you have to put up with. Well, you say, well, would it be lying, or cheating, or what would it be? This right here, money. You cannot go to heaven without God's help, without understanding the teachings of God. And the other one is, and this is one that scares me, is we're going to see in James chapter 3, brethren, be not many of you teachers, for you shall receive the greater condemnation. So I understand that tonight. While I'm standing up here, and we're in here, a bunch of sinners, a bunch of people with problems, a bunch of people who love the Lord, but whatever you want to say, I understand right now I stand in greater jeopardy than anybody there. Because I'm up here telling you tonight what God says. And if I miss it, God said, you shall receive the greater condemnation. So, that's about as bad as you can get. About as bad as you can get. Being somebody that doesn't teach the truth. Practical Christianity. Living everyday life. What are the big sins? What are the big dangers that we've got? Now tonight, we're going to learn how to accept the trials of gaining and losing earthly wealth. We're going to gain wealth, and when we gain wealth, boy, oh boy, that is dangerous. Wow. When we lose wealth, wow, that is dangerous. So anytime that we're dealing with these things, we're living in a world of danger. So what do? Well, he starts out, and he says then down here in verse 9, but let the brother of low degree glory in his high estate. So I said, now here's the attitude that you're to have. Here's the attitude you're to have whether you're rich or whether you're poor. I'm going to tell you how to think. That's what the whole section is about. It's what is up here in your mind. Here's how you think. Now, if you are of low degree, you're not rich, you're in a humble position. What do those of us in a humble position generally do when we're talking about riches and so forth, and we don't have all that wealth to go out and flaunt it around and to do this and to waste it? And what about us? Can't we get a pretty haughty attitude? Boy, we don't do that. And if I ever got wealth, I wouldn't do that, you know. And we get to thinking. I've asked several classes over the years. I said, who are the most spiritual people, the rich or the poor? And without exception, it always comes back, the poor. The poor are more spiritual. No, that's not true. Now, the poor talk like they're more spiritual, see, but they're not. Now, you see, you got a rich man like Oliver or Linda. Here it is. They don't have to act like they're humble. They know they're really something, you see. But since I'm poor, I have to act it. I don't have any choice. But what would happen to me if all of a sudden I got wealth? See? Could I change my attitude real fast? And then you'd say, well, you know, Lowell never was humble. He just acted like he was humble. He was just humble because he didn't have anything. See? And that's what happens so oftentimes. So it's what's up here. Now, he said, if you're of low degree, you're not one of the wealthy. You're one of the poor people. Now, that means of a humble position in worldly wealth. So if you're down there in that situation, you have to have an attitude. Well, what does he say? He said, I want you to glory in your high estate. Now, what he's doing, he's making a play on worldly wealth and spiritual wealth. That here's a guy who has very little worldly wealth, but he can be happy and glad because he has great spiritual wealth, because he's spiritual toward God. He's a Christian. He has found his salvation. Right? Let's suppose next week we're coming down here and any one of you find a bag alongside the road and it has $1 million in it. And you pick it up, take it to the police department, and they say, well, there's no record of this, it's yours. What would you do when you came in next week? Wouldn't it be something? Wow, look what I found. Look what I found. And that's about all you'd talk about, isn't it? Look at this. Isn't this great? So I try to get your attention. So let me tell you something here. Let me show you something right here. You see, I have a Starbucks card or some card in here. I get 10% off. And what would you think about me? Oh, Lowell, you think getting a senior discount is great. I mean, we're talking about big stuff. We're talking about $1 million, see? That'd be here. Now, let's put it this way. If you found salvation, you're driving down alongside the road. You're down along the road. You're lost. You're headed to hell. Your soul's going to be destroyed for eternity. And if all of a sudden you found a sack with salvation in it so you could go to heaven, would you have a great price? Would you have a great reward? Yeah. Would it be worth more than $1 million? Yeah, it'd be more than $1 million. That's what we have. So if we don't have any money, what do we know we have? We have great spiritual wealth. We have salvation in Christ. So I said, don't ever forget that. Don't ever forget that. So when you're thinking, oh, how bad it is with me, just think what you have. Now, I want you to think about what you have. How many other people in the world have it? Now, tonight we have about 5 billion people in the world. How many of them believe in Christ in any sense of the word? See? About 1 billion. 1 out of 5 people. Rest of them believe in Islam and Buddha and all these things. So 1 out of 5, just start out there. Now, out of all the people who say, I'm a Christian, how many of them are in man-made religions and they just talk about it? They're not really totally dedicated. You'd say, oh boy, the vast majority, yeah. And you get down and you start to say, well, how many? How many are really? Now, what was the Lord's answer to that? When you say, Lord, how many people are going to be saved? What was his answer? How many people have what you and I have tonight? He said, and few there be that find it. See how fortunate you are? Out of all the people in the world, how many has found $1 million laying alongside the road that they got to keep? Out of all the people in the world, how many has found salvation so that you've got that salvation that you got? So, are we rich? You bet. Maybe physically poor, but he said, if you are, don't ever forget how spiritually rich you are. Now he said for the rich people, for those of you who have it, it's interesting, the Greek word there is plutocrat. I think everybody in here has probably heard that word, haven't you? Have you ever heard the word plutocrat? Anybody here has not heard the word plutocrat? Is that right? Okay. Well, my generation, I guess, is there. They talk about any rich person, he's just a plutocrat. That's all he is. And they'd use it in a derogatory term, you know. That plutocrat's going over here and this plutocrat's going over here. The reason I put it up there, that's the Greek word. The Greek word is plutocrat. And so he said for the plutocrats, that is the rich people. Now, so if you are physically rich, now you need to have an attitude. And said, you need to have, in his humiliation, you need to have a humble attitude so that you're made low. So instead of looking at the poor people as inferior to you, you now need to look at the fact that you are not as great as what you think. Your riches mean nothing, just to be truthful with you. Your riches mean nothing. Now, not in this world, that's not the way it works, is it? See, I know right now, I know how you guys treat me. You push me around, make fun of me, and you do all that kind of stuff. But I'll guarantee you, if all of a sudden I became a billionaire, your attitude changed toward me. Man, nobody would ever push old Lowell around again. You'd probably all start calling me Mr. Williams. And there'd be why? Because all of a sudden, one day I'm poor, next day I'm a billionaire. And if you're a billionaire, you've got to be something spatial. See? You've got to be something spatial. Now, here's what he said. If that happens to you, and you've got that money, you keep this in mind, you're no better than the person that doesn't have any. You're all on the same level. Now, we're not going over, but you remember what Paul said to the Corinthians? He said, how many of you are called? You remember? How many great ones are called? How many wise ones are called? No. God chose the poor things, the lowly things of this world. And so you'll generally find that's what you have in Christianity. So he said, always keep that in mind. Then he said, now here's a good way of doing it. Look at what life really is. Here's what you really are. He says, now, all flesh is as grass. So he's going to start telling us in here, in this. He said, because the flower of the grass he shall pass away, for the sun ariseth and scorcheth the wind, and cometh with upon the grass, and the flower thereof fadeth, and the grace of the fashion of it perisheth. And so shall the rich man fade in all his glory. So keep in mind, regardless of how rich you are, you can't add another day's length to your life. You can't add another minute to your life. So he behooves us, go out and look at the flowers. Now, this is a good time of the year to do it. You remember just yesterday, I know it was 4 or 5 months ago, but you remember yesterday when all the flowers were blooming? And it was so beautiful around, and you'd drive up and down Main Street and see all the rhododendrons out there, and you'd look at all of that. It was just yesterday. Now you drive up and down Main Street, and what do you see? They're all gone. All the flowers, all the blooms are gone. See, that's there. You look up and what's happening to the leaves, the flowers on the trees, all the leaves. They're blowing off one by one. We're getting ready to rake them up. It won't be long. You'll look at the tree, and all it is a bunch of sticks that are sitting up there. Sit down and meditate on that tomorrow and think, that's how secure I am. If I have $1 billion, if I have $100 billion, I have 1,000 times more than Bill Gates. That's how secure I am. I have the same security, the same permanency as that pretty flower that grew out there in my yard last May. See? And you look and wow. Now, next year, when the pretty flower comes on, and you look at it and you say, isn't that beautiful? That one is a whole lot prettier than this one. Oh, I like this. Yeah, this one's a lot prettier than that one. What's going to happen to the pretty one? It's going to fall. And have you ever noticed this? Have you ever noticed the difference between your perennials and your annuals? And have you ever noticed the difference between the flowers that are the prettiest and the flowers that are not the prettiest? Which bloom lasts the longest? Wouldn't it be nice if we could have those pretty blooms all year? No, they're pretty, and then they fall away. Give you another little illustration. I do this every year. I go out and I look at that tree, times in my yard, and you see, right now, breeze blowing, there'll be a leaf falling, another leaf falling, another leaf falling. There's a million leaves up there, but nothing falling. I stop and I look at it and I think, now, Lowell, you're one of those leaves. And you're getting ready to fall. And so out here, all these other people, they're a leaf. Wonder who that leaf is. Is that me or is that somebody that's going to go before me? And so I look at those leaves and think, now who? Somewhere in there I am. But what do I know about those million leaves that are on my tree? This month, they're all going to be gone. See, they're all going to fall. So James says, practical Christianity. He said, go look at that. Go think about that. And helps you put your mind in proper perspective. Helps you see, really, what life is all about. So the grass refers to all kind of vegetation. He said, then the hot wind comes up. Now, over there in the east, it's just solid desert. It's just terrible, hot desert. And when the wind comes from the east, it comes in, it's so hot that it kills all the vegetation, all the blooms over there in Israel. You find the Bible is full of it. As you go through, the Bible tells us over and over and over and over again to do this. And it shall not utterly wither. When shall it not utterly wither when the east wind toucheth it? So he talks about this. And down there, he talks about Jonah. God prepared an east wind, and it came in, killed the gourd all in one day. Isaiah said, all flesh is grass, and all the goodness thereof as the flower of the field. So that's how permanent you are. Go pick out your flower. Go pick it out, say, there I am. Next spring, don't forget to do this. You look out, pick out the prettiest flower in there. There I am. There I am. And keep your eye on it. And by this time next fall, you will say, wow. Throughout the Bible, it uses this. For as man, his days are as grass, as the flower of the field, so he flourisheth. The wind passeth over and it is gone, and the place thereof shall know it no more. So that's what's going to happen, and it'll all be gone. All flesh is grass. So this is practical Christianity. That's what I'm getting at. That's in there. So now, a major lesson of life that we must learn. In Matthew chapter 13, verse 22, the parable of the sower. We talk about the four sow, the one that goes out and falls on the hearts of men and all this. But I want to emphasize one little thing in that parable. It said, and he that was sown among the thorns, this is he that heareth the word, and the care of the world, and the deceitfulness of riches choke the world, and he becometh unfruitful. So here it is. Jesus said there's 4 kinds of people. One of them is when you receive that word, and then you have all these other things out here, these thorns, and then he explains what it is. What are the thorns of life? It's the deceitfulness of riches. So when I become rich, I said, man, I've got it made. And I probably try to become more rich and richer. And he says, it's all the deceitfulness of riches. That's what you have. That's what you have. Suppose I asked you, told you, said, you know, I've got a mate picked out. Linda, I got a mate picked out for you. I got a guy. I know him. A really handsome guy. Really handsome, really smart. No, he really liked it. The only thing I really know about him is he is the most deceitful person I've ever seen. Otherwise, I mean, this doggy has it. You interested? Why? I mean, you get everything else that goes with it. He's as good looking as I am. And so you look at it, you say, well, man, you know, but that's the only quality. You wouldn't touch the guy, you see, that is there. What are we going to do with our riches? I'll take them, right? Now, I'm not saying it's wrong to be rich. I'm just telling you, this is what the Bible says. Now, we need to learn a lesson about all of this. Now, in 2 Corinthians, Paul said, here's one thing that we need to learn. As we're looking at things, as you grow older and older and over, we look not at the things that are seen, but at the things which are not seen. For the things which are seen are temporal. So anything you can see, any earthly thing, it's just here for a little while. Now, here's the most healthy perspective of life toward riches. In Proverbs 30, he said, 2 things have I asked of thee. Deny me not them before I die. Please give them to me, Lord. Remove far from me falsehood and lies. That's number 1. Help me that I'm through with all lying and all falsehood. Remove that from me. And then number 2, give me neither poverty nor riches. That's kind of unique, isn't it? Kind of unique to pray to the Lord. Lord, give me neither poverty nor riches. Because he said, I realize the danger that's in both of these. He said, feed me with the food that is needful for me. Now in Matthew chapter 5 and 6, the Lord talked about the attitude toward riches. And he talked about laying up riches on this earth, you know, and this or that, and about your clothes that you wear and the food you eat. And he said, when you pray, you ask God, Lord, feed me. You remember what he said? Give me bread. That's what he asked for. Give me food. Give me food, Lord. Now here's what I'd like for the Lord to do. I figure I have maybe 10 more years. In realistic terms, I've got 3 more years. So, Lord, just to be sure, would you give me 12 more years of food? See, that I can have here. Do you ever have a temptation to want that and pray for that and all that? Now, what did the Lord say? He said, pray like this. Lord, give me today what? My daily bread. Isn't that one of the hardest things you've ever done? Is to make that prayer and really, really believe in it. So he said, here's the problem. Lest I be full and deny thee and say, who is Jehovah? Now I realize, I don't think anybody in this audience would if you become filthy rich, I don't think you'd say, but who is Jehovah, you see? But here's another way of doing it. Another way of denying the Lord, can you talk about the Lord, how wonderful the Lord is? Oh, how wonderful he is. And I never miss services, but I trust in riches, and that's how I live my life. Can you do that? And can you remove the Lord from your life so you're not totally dependent upon him? Isn't that the easiest thing in the world to do? So he said, I don't want that. On the other hand, I don't want to be poor and steal and use profanely the name of God. So I don't want to be so poor that I be tempted and go out and start stealing, cheating, and then use God's name in a vain way. So he said, Lord, here's the two things I want you to give me. Take all falsehood and lies away, and give me neither poverty nor riches. What a prayer. What a prayer. But what's this class about tonight? What's the book of James about? How you live everyday life. See? How you live it. When you come to the apostles, John said, Beloved, I pray, he's writing this man, that in all things thou mayest prosper and be in health, even as thy soul prospereth. So I said, brother, I pray that you will prosper. I pray that you will prosper in every way, and you'll be in good health. I pray that you'll have good health, even as your soul prospers. Just like you have the strength of soul, your spiritual soul, your spiritual strength, I pray that you'll have earthly prosperity that'll be able to match that. And then the Apostle Paul wraps it all up by giving us that perfect situation. He said, Not that I speak in respect of want, for I have learned. Now he wrote to them and asked them for help, the Philippians. I have learned in whatsoever state, this is financial state, I am in, therein to be content. I've learned that. Whatever it is, to be content. I know how to be abased. I know how to be in poverty. I know how to lose it. And I know how to abound. He said, I've been poor. I've been rich. And I've learned in life, by being poor and being rich, that in whatever state, whatever condition I'm in, to therein to be content. In everything and in all things, I have learned the secret. So you'll know the secret of life? To be filled and to be hungry. I know how to be rich and I know how to be hungry, both to abound and to be in want or need, and I can do all things in Him that strengtheneth me. So what the Bible does, and what James is doing, he's trying to reach into our minds, and he's trying to tell us that we live in this financial climate, regardless of where you are and whatever nation you are, you have to fight this battle. It's one of the biggest battles that there is. And he says, don't fight the battle on how much money you have or how little money you have. Don't do this or don't do that. But fight this battle up here. Make sure that you have your mind in proper condition. Make sure that you say that in Christ, I can be contented. It's not wrong to be rich. Paul said, I've been rich. And it's not wrong to be poor. He said, I've been poor. But he said, here's the secret. You learn whatever state you're in, therein to be content. You ever hear a more practical exhortation than that? Something that would help us, and especially today, as the stock market just crashed, just accidentally on this particular day as we're getting ready to talk about this. But it's a good illustration of real practical Christianity. Now then, in the next section, we're going to be talking about our troubles and trials, the troubles and trials that we go through and what we do in all of these things. Now I have about 10 minutes left, but we're going to stop right here. And the reason we're going to stop is that this is a section all within itself. And it's going to deal with it. It's going to show us that, that as you go through life, you have temptations. We've already learned the word temptation can be used in two ways. It can be used in an outside trouble coming into my life and causing me all kind of trouble. And it can be used as a thing that tests me to see how strong I am. And so James is going to give us practical Christianity. He's going to say, now I'm going to weigh it out on the balance. Now when this happens, here's what you do. And when this happens, here's what you do. But right now what you do is go home. Thank you.